Yo, what's up, guys? MosquitoforkGAMING back once again with a very different type of video. Now, I floated this topic around for the first time ever in the history of anything. Right? I promise you that. When I played the Christmas Day of Fun, and I've had time to linger on it. And now that I've officially beaten the most recent and what I presume to be final installment, things can change, but at the moment of this recording, final installment of the Slenderman Must Die octology, I figured it was about time to establish the standard, a basis for what the Slenderman Must Die games represent for the AAA industry. They are the top echelon of all that is video gaming. But even relative to their own success, there are some games that are better, in parentheses, perfect, and some that are not perfect, in parentheses, simply amazing. Right? So, don't construe this list as, you know, if something, I doubt this will happen, but if something somehow weasels its way into D tier, don't take that as the game is bad. Believe me, it's relative to the Slenderman Must Die series. Okay? And we now have established a common ground. I'm sure, I mean, you've taken this journey with me, ladies and gentlemen. I have no doubt that you have your own thoughts about each and every one of these games. Parts that you liked, parts that you didn't. For as much as you can't really perceive the game as I do my best to make myself a vessel for you to impose yourself onto me so that you play the game while I'm playing it. Okay? And I'm sure that has allowed for you to establish a very, very saturated and prominent opinion about each of these games. But will they line up with what I think? That matters not. What matters most is that it'll spark discussion, and maybe we can establish a common ground. All right? Maybe my ranking is going to be just completely bogus, but I'll be sure to explain myself in excruciating detail, so that, you know, all of our ducks in a row and none of our wires get crossed. And if you contest what I believe to be correct with this list, be sure to put that in the comment section down below, and I would be happy to engage with you if your answer is wrong or if it's correct. Okay? Alright then. With that said, let's get started. At the top of the list, in the sequence that they are ordered at the bottom of the list right now, we're gonna go sequentially. So we're not going off a chronological release, not how I played them, off of numerical release. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Meaning that we start with Chapter 1. Slenderman Must Die, Chapter 1, Slenderman Must Die. I think we all know where this game is going. It's easily going into S tier. This game single-handedly spawned the Slenderman Must Die franchise, right? But when it comes to attributes like that, when it comes to video games, movies, anything, just because something was the progenitor of something great, doesn't always mean it's the best. Something had to get the ball rolling. That doesn't mean it's going to supersede all that come after it. But what this game has above the rest, and each and every installment following this game, is its modesty. You have no idea where you are. Well, actually, no. You have a vague idea of where you are. You're in this abandoned building. Firstly, way to go against the grain poison games. Slenderman is known for being in a scary, creepy forest. This, in an abandoned building, we're both outside of our element here. We've never been in the building. The Slenderman's never been in the building. Everybody's scared, but probably not the Slenderman, because he's the puppet master. And the deception and the twists and turns that this story provides you. I remember my first gut reaction when I came across one of those counterfeit pages. Oh look, it's a page! Just kidding! There's nothing on it. The trap set up by the Slenderman, it really put into perspective the intelligence of the Slenderman and just how formidable of a foe he could be. This game was all around on a scale of 20. I'm gonna go on a scale of 20 because 9 out of 10, that's not giving it enough points. But I don't want to give it a 10 out of 10 because nothing's perfect. There's always room to improve. For instance, the game could have been infinitely expansive, so I never would have had to stop playing the game ever. That would have made it perfect. But unfortunately, there's only, you know, it's like a 300 square foot building. I can only explore so much. Can't play the game till the end of time. I mean, realistically I could, but I mean, but you know, you understand what I'm saying. So on a scale of 20, this easily gets a 19.5. Okay, that is how good this game is. Not even taking, I mean, we haven't even taken into consideration other aspects of the game that are a little bit more superficial, like the design of the Slenderman. Absolute peak, the Slenderman design, I must say, it never got improved after this design. And this design does make an appearance in future installments periodically, but it gets ditched in favor of other models, which we will discuss as we go down the list. Okay? The weapon selection. Very, very modest. A pistol and the shotgun. Okay? What a perfect arsenal. They don't want to give you a ranged weapon because the way the Slenderman sets up his traps in this abandoned building would allow for a ranged attack to be too overpowered. So they give you something with a little bit more bang, but short range, and then the pistol with a little bit more range, but does less damage. The balance that was stricken there was absolutely perfect. Not to mention the organic matter in which the player can restore their health is implemented into the game, with the world-generated pizzas and cookies and milk that you can find around the map. It is plain genius. Not to, we're not even going to talk about the set dressing. Each page has its own dedicated and specifically designed room. It is simply fantastic. It is simply fantastic. And the fact that this is what started off the series, I mean, unparalleled, this game. I'd have a hard time believing if this game will get superseded. But it may happen along down the road, okay? But with all that said, we must now move on to the second installment of the Slenderman Must Die Octology, which is Slenderman Must Die Chapter 2, Dead_Space. Now despite when I recorded and did my commentary for this game, I was actually around during a lot of these games' releases. I missed the launch of Slenderman Must Die Chapter 1, but I did not miss the launch of Slenderman Must Die Chapter 2. I was there on launch day. I had it pre-ordered and installed on my computer the day it got released. But I must say the barrier to entry is vast with this with this installment. It goes so far. It's the polar opposite in many ways to what the first installment sought out to be, right? The modesty and humbleness of the first installment was completely flipped on its head with the second installment, taking place on a spaceship. At some point in the future, you're using ham weaponry powered by tuna of some kind. Very odd, very strange, but also advanced. Just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it's worse. So my gut instinct was to say this is worse, but really I don't think that's the case. And even with the fact that we're in an even more foreign environment, because an abandoned building, I mean, I got a couple around my house, right? Sometimes I go sleep in them. But this is entirely different. This is a spaceship. An intergalactic spaceship. And looking at the photo right here, I have no goddamn idea what planet that is. So we have transcended extreme spatial travel, right? So it's beyond even the most capable minds on the planet Earth right now. So this is a lot more to digest. And yet somehow they managed to strike a balance once again. Through environmental storytelling, they managed to tell you exactly where humanity lies in their technological innovation. And if you look between the lines, you can tell that we haven't gone into the future at all. This is just modern day times, and we had to essentially go with the nuclear option in terms of going with risky but very effective technology at the cost of its realism, right? We had to develop the Mjolnir armor that Master Chief wore. We found his body in the ship, and you know the weapons are made of ham and tuna, and things like that. And you know, the pipe infrastructure of the ship itself suggests that it was haphazardly created in an attempt to flee the Slenderman, or maybe even capture him by sending him into deep space. That remains up to interpretation to this day. And that is the beauty of the Slenderman Must Die series. The fact that discussions are still pending about this series on merely the second installment alone is a testament to how well crafted the entire series is as a whole. But we're talking about Chapter 2 right now. And it's extraordinarily well paced. It has all of the positive attributes of the first game. It really does. But it has a more diverse weapon sandbox, and in my playthrough, I actually missed a weapon. I missed a weapon! There was a shotgun that could one-shot the Slenderman. That would have been immensely helpful. Apparently I got off by the skin of my teeth. But that's neither here nor there. I still made it. It was spectacularly crafted. The only quarrels I really had with this game, the model that they chose to use for the Slenderman is not my favorite. It's the more spider-like, almost wispy type of Slenderman who has no arms, no legs, just tentacles in the back. Not my favorite design for the Slenderman, but for this installment, I believe it makes sense. For the intergalactic travel must have happened very quickly, and some type of distortion when the Slenderman decided to latch himself onto the vessel that we decided to launch into space. Must have distorted his figure somehow. It's not like he doesn't have O2, so he had to adapt, and then he got disfigured. I mean, that was abundantly clear. So, that I can forgive, despite my artistic conflictions with the model. I believe it was actually, it's warranted, it's okay, it gets a pass. But in terms of general pacing, the page selection, the environmental storytelling, the weapon sandbox, the tasks that you have to complete. Oh yeah, I said page selection. There wasn't a page selection in Dead Space. It was the Twizzlers. I completely forgot about that. That's right. I'm still in that honeymoon phase from the page selection of Chapter 1. That page selection, absolutely flawless. It never gets better than that. So, the Twizzlers, they're a fun item to collect, but they're not as diverse as the pages. I feel so shameful having forgotten that detail. I promise you I'm not a fake fan. So, you know, but to compensate for that, there's a lot more of them to collect. So, they do strike something of a balance, but not as good as Slenderman Must Die Chapter 1. And for that, I must put Slenderman Dead Space. I'm trying to think ahead here. For the time being, it's going into B tier. I do have conflictions with some of the art style. The barrier to entry is quite vast. For somebody who came into the series at around the same time I did, I was fortunate enough to play Chapter 1 before I played Chapter 2. So I had this understanding of Poison Games and the quality standard that they set for their series before going in. But somebody who hadn't played a game, and for as enticing and shiny as Slenderman Dead Space is, it's either going to assist greatly in acquiring new players, or it's going to be a serious barrier. And I think that might be a problem. Right? But fortunately, this isn't the first installment in the series, so that problem negligible, I imagine, at best. I mean, with how many, Slenderman Must Die Chapter 1 had like 18 million downloads day one, so I can imagine Chapter 2 probably had somewhere around 25. Poison Games probably has the statistics on that. Wish I had them with me, but I don't. But that, for the time being, Slenderman Must Die Dead Space goes into B tier. That could change at any point. Moving on to Chapter 3. Slenderman Must Die Chapter 3. The Silent Forest. Okay? Now, on paper, this should work swellingly. This is Slenderman's home turf. They're bringing back the fundamentally correct model as quintessential Slenderman. That I think we can all agree on. The model used in Chapter 1 was essential Slenderman. He's tall, he's slender, he's got the suit, he has no face. Tentacles, they come out when he needs to attack. That feature was not implemented in Chapter 1. I don't think it was necessary. But that is the description of the Slenderman. Right? So this is the standard of Slenderman models, and it was brought back for Chapter 3. However, one major fault of Chapter 3 is the sheer size of the sandbox, which I know sounds kind of hypocritical because I mentioned in Chapter 1 the only thing I could have made it better is if I got to play it endlessly. But that's different from the environment just being cumbersome and repetitive. Those are some harsh words I'm using, but it's the only ones that I can conjure up. My English lexicon isn't very vast, so forgive me if I don't have my thesaurus next to me to use a better word that's a little bit less offensive. But the chapter 3 is so expansive, and they have a lot of notable locations. Firstly, we get a nice harkening back to Slender's mansion. What a spectacular reference. I mean, not even a reference, it's a major location in the game. But Slender's mansion making an appearance is simply fantastic. As terrified as I was when I was playing the game, there was a very large part of me, a major fundamental part of my soul, that was ecstatic and jumping up and down with glee when I saw Slender's mansion. I'm so happy that didn't get forgotten. There was the campgrounds, the numerous houses strewn about. The starting area alone was also very impressive, right? We really did feel like we were breaching into foreign territory. We were spawning at the top of the hill in our military vehicle, and we had to climb down this steep ravine, almost, in order to breach into the Slenderman's domain. We really felt like an intruder here. This was the first installment where the question could be asked, is the Slenderman really the bad guy? Because if we look at past installments, excluding Chapter 2, Chapter 1, we're going into his domain. I mean, it's not like we were called there. You know, it could be assumed that the Slenderman was minding his own business, right? So that type of narrative nuance and discussion, it just gets better as the installments go on, right? So narratively, Chapter 3 is simply fantastic for both its ambiguity, but also its necessity for what it directly contributes to the plot. It leaves a lot of blanks to be filled, while also not at the compromise of what information is necessary. And for that, that is indispensable. A lot of every last one of these games maintains that aspect relatively well, but this one was truly the progenitor of that concept. And that gives it a lot of merit. But unfortunately, it is dragged down from how expansive the entire forest is. There's a lot of dead air. And because of that, the forest itself is really just an obstacle. If I remember correctly, there's only one page on a tree. The rest are at the notable locations. Really, considering how many times I've played the game, I'm a seasoned veteran. I know that all you have to do is follow the path to the left, and you keep following the path, and you will eventually, through your peripheral vision and things that are off in the distance, see every notable location and find the pages rather quickly. But when you're playing the game for the first time, that is not apparent. So you're going to do a lot of wandering. And to those who have been initiated to the Slenderman's ritual, who expect the pages to be sporadically strewn about this vast forest, may feel somewhat intimidated and confused when they don't come across a page when they're investigating every last tree. That is an unfortunate deficit of this game that I feel like brings it down quite a bit, actually. Because even when you know the path, it takes quite a long time to beat. And unlike with Chapter 1, where the tension is at its all-time highest, that aspect I don't think is maintained nearly as well in Chapter 3. And it's baffling that that's the case, because the Slenderman in Chapter 3 could one-shot you, and you would have to start all over. In Chapter 1, you could take 2 or 3 hits from the Slenderman and be able to walk away with your life, barely. But in Chapter 3, he's far more dangerous, and his spawns are significantly less frequent. Yet, the tension is lowered because of what was done with the level, which is highly unfortunate. This return to the fundamentals of the Slenderman should have been the best entry in the series, but unfortunately, I don't believe it will reside in a spot in S tier, nor A tier. But the real question is, does it belong in B or C tier? I believe I will put it in C tier, which is very unfortunate. This installment holds a very important place in my heart. For as Chapter 2 was my introduction to what a release of a Slenderman Must Die game is like, being acquainted with how Poison Games makes their releases should have made Chapter 3 all the better. Perhaps it was my acquaintance with how Poison Games releases their installments with Chapter 2 that made me have unreasonable expectations with the installment, and therefore I was underwhelmed with the level design, especially with how expertly crafted the levels were in Chapters 1 and 2. So I may have something of a what's the word I'm looking for? Not an intelligence bias, but an experience bias. But I've had years of reflection to look back, and I don't think that's the case. If upon reflection of further chapters, it may manage to move up, but I find that doubtful. But with Chapter 3 out of the way, we need to move on to Chapter 4. The Slenderman Must Die. The Silent Streets. Okay? This was when it was first apparent to the audience that the Slenderman Must Die games were interconnected much more tightly than we had initially assumed. For as distant and far off as Chapter 2 was to Chapters 1 and 3, the Silent Streets made it abundantly clear that the Silent Streets, this lightless city, was just a neighbor of the Silent Streets that we had just barely crawled out of in the previous chapter. It introduced another brand spanking new aspect to the Slenderman Must Die series, adding yet another layer of immense depth to the plot. We had so much more to connect at this point, as if analyzing each installment on its own wasn't a hefty enough task. Now that they're all interconnected, trying to plug and play each of these installments into one another was an immensely complicated task for the Slenderman Must Die community. For several chapters, even after Chapter 4 came out, for a time, Slenderman Must Die Chapter 4 felt like it had thrown a wrench into the story that was the Slenderman Must Die series. For, at the time, we did not have the faith in Poison Games, and we figured that they were just trying to interconnect these things as a feeble attempt to make the plot have more depth. How we could assume that Poison Games didn't have this plan from the very start, it really is shameful to think that we could have been so simple-minded regarding this video game studio. But as embarrassing as it is to reflect, we have long since grown, and we have come to understand exactly what Poison Games can do. And since Chapter 5, really, more so Chapter 6, we have not questioned their authority in any capacity. For that, this chapter is simply fantastic. They managed to forge a brand new setting, one that is refreshing, one that adds a lot of verticality, but also plays into the Slenderman's strengths. The Slenderman resides in a forest, that's his home. But how can you introduce a new environment that isn't going to be alienating to our foe and not overly beneficial to us? A lightless city. That stroke of genius blew my mind when I first saw it. I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of such a thing when they announced this title. And with spirits mildly tempered after Chapter 3, the mere title reveal for this game and how ambiguous. I mean, look at this photo. Can I open this photo in a new tab? I don't believe I can. But it's just the silhouette of the Slenderman with a couple of graves, some pitch black clouds, a green horizon. We couldn't see a single detail. It was looming death. It was truly spectacular. It was almost a rebranding of this of the Slenderman Must Die series. We could tell that even with the immense knowledge that Poison Games possesses, they were still learning. They needed to figure out what worked and what didn't. And all of this was so layered that it took us years to be able to figure out what exactly they didn't know at the time of making the first few installments. But this is when they really got into their stride and understood what a Slenderman Must Die title truly means. So, the Slenderman Must Die Silent Streets is a simply fantastic installment into the series. and it possesses many of the positive traits of Chapter 1. And it is something, it feels almost like a return to form, this brutalist industrial art style. The Slenderman looming around every corner. He even adapted new tactics. Right? He almost got me with an aerial assault. I'd never seen such a thing come out of the Slenderman. That level of verticality didn't extend just to the city, but to the Slenderman himself. He used that to his advantage. It was truly spectacular. So, with that all said, Slenderman was not Chapter 4, The Silent Streets. I'm going to put it in A tier. The Slenderman was not Chapter 4, Silent Streets is a simply fantastic an introduction for a new player. That is a worthy intro. It's not too abrasive or oppressive in terms of its lore implications. You're not gonna be able to, for if you were to dive into Dead Space or even the Silent Forest, you would feel kind of alienated because you would understand that things have happened before that led to where you are today. But not as much with the Silent Streets. The context of it being interconnected with the previous chapters is only apparent if you've played the previous chapters. To a new player, it will just be set dressing. But then it gets recontextualized when you've played the previous chapters. And to strike that balance is simply fantastic. They had the foresight to both plan ahead for new players, but also respect the players that have been coming along for the ride since Chapter 1 even. So it has rightfully earned its spot in A tier, and maybe as the time goes on I might bump it up to S tier, but the Silent Streets is simply fantastic. Next up, we have the Chapter 5. We have the Slenderman was not Chapter 5, The Underground Bunker. This one was quite the journey. Regardless of skill, this was the longest campaign that Poison Games had ever produced. And especially it being a Slenderman Must Die title, it was quite the expedition. Days had to be taken. I remember when this game dropped, the workforce almost collapsed because the campaign was so... What's the opposite of brevity? Longevity, I suppose? The longevity of the campaign meant that people had to constantly fake that they were going in sick to work. Or not going into work because they were sick. To finish the campaign. So even those extremely versed with the tactics of the Slenderman and how Poison Games forges their titles, even still, even to this very day as I've played the title numerous times, it still takes, it is quite the journey. It is an expansive journey. And one that revitalizes a lot of aspects of the Slenderman Must Die franchise. This was truly our first look at an enemy subclass, a follower and legion of the Slenderman. Loyal followers of the Slenderman had finally been introduced, which only makes sense. A force like this would foster such things. And it was quite jarring. Right, we had just escaped the abandoned city, and on the outskirts, we had the underground bunker. Right, and to many, and the working theory as of right now, is that the underground bunker was the primary task of the Slenderman in the Silent Streets, was essentially just him stringing us along and attempting to divert us away from the underground bunker. But even still, he prepared, for armed forces lined the walls of this underground bunker, and damn near it kept me from getting in. But unfortunately, we've had 4 previous chapters to prepare ourselves, so it wasn't futile, but man, it just, all that can be said is that it didn't work. But I was missing a few limbs. Each and every run, I get out within a hair of my life. The weapon sandbox was completely revitalized with this particular installment. Heavy machine guns were introduced, multiple different light machine guns, melee, pistols. We had multiple different types of things to collect in this chapter. We had keys, we had objects, we had pages, all sorts of different things. This doubled down on all of the attributes of the previous installments, and just it said bigger is better. And fortunately enough for this installment, despite its longevity, it worked in its favor. Many go big or go home. They jump the shark and they fall flat on their face, and the franchise can never be brought up again. But The Slenderman Must Die, the Poison Games masterfully crafted Slenderman Must Die Chapter 5, The Underground Bunker, and I feel like, to the audience, the ambitions of that game were immense, but to Poison Games, I feel like they had even bigger ambitions and then managed to subdue them themselves. So relative to us, these are crazy ambitions, but relative to the staff at Poison Games, they might have been not as ambitious as they wanted to be. But, you know, remains to be seen. We don't know what goes on behind the scenes. I would say this installment is simply fantastic, and we do get a reference to the best Slenderman model. He does show up in this title, but it is not primarily used in favor of the more spider-like model that gets used for a lot of the chapters. Realistically, that model represents the face of the Slenderman Must Die series, which is unfortunate, but it has been used more frequently than any of the others. So, you know, but that's an artistic quarrel. I really can't say that I'm comfortable docking this installment points based on an artistic choice. And many love that model. So, for that, I will not dock it any points. With all of that said, the level design, the weapon sandbox, the ambition, the storytelling, it is simply fantastic. And I believe it, in fact, because of its longevity and its scale, supersedes the chapter that came before it, The Silent Streets. It is going into A tier above The Silent Streets. A simply fantastic chapter, one that I unfortunately wasted away with an editing mistake. It is very unfortunate that such a thing happened, but I was in the infancy of my career and mistakes will be made. Perhaps a return to previous chapters, a revitalization, a reflection, a retrospective could take place in the future, but that's entirely up to you, the people, if you would even like to see such a thing. But with Slenderman Must Die Chapter 5, the underground bunker out of the way, we must move on to the Slenderman Must Die Chapter 6, Industrial Waste. This is a very, very unfortunate scar on the reputation that is not only Slenderman Must Die, but Poison Games as a whole. And there were many rumors going around about outsourcing the development of this title to other less apt studios, which I believe wholeheartedly. For this title, as interconnected as it does maintain necessary story beats. Do not get it twisted. It is abundantly clear just how adjacent this title's location is to the underground bunker. The world building was not compromised with this title. But the unfortunate thing about this title is the ambitions of not only the enemy and weapon selection of the game, but primarily the map. The map has in its possession many faults. It is claustrophobic, but not for the right reasons. For you see, Chapter 1 was claustrophobic. You were afraid to round every corner for fear of the Slender Man having bested you in a battle of wits, and you would lose your life. This one is claustrophobic simply because the stage for the Slender Man to perform is small. There is not a lot for him to work with. I could map the entire... I mean, on my first playthrough, hand me a piece of pen and paper, I could chart out a blueprint of this map from memory. It is that small and unremarkable. There is only one building that you can enter, excluding buildings that have fallen by the wayside and are destroyed. And it really feels like a scaled down version of Chapter 3, significantly. A fraction of the size. If I had to guess a realistic mathematical term, maybe 1/18th of the size. And like with Chapter 3, the silent streets, it's empty space, notable location, notable location, notable location, notable location. You can pinpoint from in chapter 6 from a distance where all of the pages will likely be, which is highly unfortunate. This is the shortest title relative to every aspect. Its narrative is seriously subdued, and it really lacks ambition. And forget its brevity. Short and sweet can be simply fantastic. I've had such experiences with Poison Games numerous times in the past. Look to the Let's Kill Jeff the Killer series of video games, or even the Shoot Your Nightmare series. Some of those titles are extraordinarily brief, but immensely entertaining. They did not walk past the line of salt when it came to making some of those titles. They had ideas, and they didn't force themselves to have to fill in the blanks just to make it longer. They understood that sometimes a modest and humble experience is better than one that is padded with a bunch of unnecessary introductions. But unfortunately, this title is not brief, but amazingly rich. It's brief, and that's it. It has no method of compensating for its brevity, and it has the deficits of the level design. And those are the two primary issues. Talking more superficially, we need to mention the enemy, the page, and the weapon sandbox. For it felt seriously out of character, both for Poison Games and for the Slenderman, to introduce things like scorpions and zombies into the enemy sandbox. Now, legions of soldiers makes sense. Even zombies, to a degree, as long as the scope and scale of the zombies is understood and explained. Because I do believe zombies showed up in the underground bunker, but don't hold me to my word on that. I believe it was just legions, but there could be zombies there. The fact that I can't remember tells me that they weren't unremarkable. It's that they were so well ingrained within the story. I mean, if they were terrible, believe me, I'd remember. So, with that said, the scorpions come out of nowhere. And the implication of such a thing simply baffles me. The Slenderman, in the Slenderman Must Die series, is showcased to have a form of telepathy. Manipulation of the mind on a very deep level, being able to coax the player and manipulate them not just through the powerful tactic of telepathy, but also through the tactics at which our fellow human beings must manipulate others through deception by counterfeit pages. Like, he didn't need to breach our mind and puppeteer us to fool us. Simply a stroke of wit and genius allowed him to manipulate us, the player, with a false counterfeit page. Simply genius. But here, they lean too heavily on the aspect of his telepathy. Scorpions have no diplomacy or recourse. And considering how grounded and realistic the Slenderman Must Die universe is, it really feels like you can tell that this game was outsourced to a studio who greatly misunderstood just the impact and realism that the Slenderman Must Die, at that time, septology had. And I've lost many nights of sleep trying to figure out exactly what led to Chapter 6 getting created. And I'm getting off track. That's just the enemy sandbox. Scorpions, it doesn't make any sense. There's the page sandbox. It's an extraordinarily well-written page. For those who don't remember, the page reads, Poison Games, the one that kills the Slenderman! An amazing page. One that extracts an aspect of reality and harnesses you in the world and makes you feel followed in real life. But unfortunately, I feel like they harped on that concept too heavily. For every page reads the same proverb. Each and every page has the same script written on it. And it strikes me as lazy. I mean, worst comes to worst, you split the scripture across the pages. They've done this numerous times. Right? Make no mistake. They know what they're doing here. But for this, they crammed the entire scripture onto one page and copied and pasted it. That is not the Poison Games mission statement, people. That just isn't. And the weapon sandbox in itself was its own debacle, for many of the weapons are redundant. Not for weapons getting replaced. Like in many video games, you start off with a weak weapon, and as you progress through the game, you get more and more powerful weapons. One of those weaker weapons will lose its importance. That's just the way the wind blows. Unless you make all of your weapons utility weapons, but this is a realistic universe. They can't introduce like a laser gun or some Tesla cannon or something like that. They have to rely on firearms. But unfortunately, in real life, the precedent for the hierarchy of firearms has already been established. You have short range, you have medium range, you have long range, and then you have specialty weapons like bazookas. But even still, with that aspect of life already sorted out for them, they still couldn't strike the balance, which is even more perplexing for more ambitious sandboxes, like with the heavy machine guns in the chapter immediately preceding this one. They struck the balance right on the head. I mean, one confident swing of the hammer got the nail into the wood with previous chapters. This one, they missed horrendously, and now the wood is tarnished, and you have to go back to Lowe's or Home Depot. Which one's wood is going to be less warped? Yeah, goodness gracious. Cut down your own goddamn tree. And that's even more effort. So, the implications there are terrible. So, the fact that so little could be done right, and they also give you an axe in this game for some bizarre reason, and its arc, its swing is horrendous, especially for the scorpion enemies, which are abundant. So this chapter, if it isn't apparent enough, I have a lot of issues with this chapter, and that's not even accounting technical errors. I've played each chapter at a minimum of 8 times. At an absolute minimum. The reason the number is 8 and not 60, like with most other chapters, is because of this game and this game alone. This game single-handedly brought the average playtime of each game down significantly. I cannot bring myself to play this game more than once every couple of years. That's blasphemous, truly. For I have an annual playthrough of the Slenderman Must Die series usually once a week. That is what this series means to me. That is how timeless and I almost wanted to say perfect right there. The fact that that thought popped into my head alone should be a testament. But this game really is the weakest link, and it's quite a weak link, my friends. It really is a lemming. And the technical errors, you know, even if I wanted to play this chapter again, I can't. There is a section when you open the garage that you can get stuck on the floor and you can't move. And you must restart the game over. Luckily, the experience is brief. So, it's not that much of a loss when you get stuck in that section. You can just start over. Great, you lost 3 minutes because the set is so small. So, with all that being said, this chapter was a serious downgrade to ones prior, and it really ignites a fury within me. I go numb with rage thinking of how Poison Games was used in some seriously subtextual way. Poison Games would never allow themselves to be worked like this. And I believe they were given an offer to have the game made in a shorter time span. the stakes for the Slenderman MSI series was at an all-time high. Right, this was Chapter 6, and with the stroke of genius that came with the underground bunker, the standard was higher than ever, and Poison Games knew they could meet it, but I feel like they had their own issues with self-esteem and perhaps even imposter syndrome among the devs, which makes sense when you make products as good as this. That's going to come along with it. And since then, they have achieved immense mental fortitude, and they have never buckled again, and I don't believe they ever will. But this was a very dark period for the Slenderman Must Die series, and it was very unfortunate to see such a titan as Poison Games be taken advantage of like this. Or so the rumor states. I believe them. I believe them. Not just out of love for the Slenderman Must Die series, but out of love for the developers. And for that, I believe that Slenderman Must Die Chapter 6, Industrial Waste, will go into D tier. So spitting in the face of my prophecy that I regurgitated at the beginning of this video. But this is a memory I wish to suppress for many, many years, and unfortunately it rears its ugly head once again, and I'm reminded of a very dark period in the Slenderman Must Die series. Now, positive attributes of the game do include its graphics, but unfortunately that is a fundamental aspect of every Slenderman Must Die title. If the graphics were not up to par, that's a deliberate attempt to not have the graphics. That's just something that's been established already. Them not having it wouldn't be an excuse. They would have no excuse at all. So I'm not sure that could really be a point in its benefit, but it is a visually stunning game, as all of Poison Games' titles are. But outside of that, I really don't have a lot of positive things to say. And like a phoenix rising from the ashes, their next installment turned the ship around. The Titanic was halfway under the water, it was breaking in half. But somehow the captain understood something and nobody else could. Lifted the ship from the shallowy depths. The dark depths, the shallowy depths. That's an oxymoron, ladies and gentlemen. Chapter 6 has me in such a tizzy. I can't even use English properly at the moment. Please forgive me. But not only did they repair the ship and pull it out of the deep dark depths, but they provided warmth and vanquished the iceberg that sunk it in the first place. For Slenderman Must Die Chapter 7, The Abandoned Graveyard, was one of the most fantastic pieces of media that I've ever had the pleasure of indulging in. The fact that they did not charge money for this installment almost offends me. And I feel like their self-esteem regarding the installment that came before Chapter 7 prevented them from doing such a thing. Even still, they wouldn't charge money for it. That is how much they care about their fans, and that is how much they just have such a love and respect for the franchise. Developers like this, they're the only ones of their kind that I've ever bore witness to. I've never witnessed a single creative mind that produces media be so generous. So, this turnaround was simply staggering. I was stunned and paralyzed when I finished this experience. Now perhaps it was recency bias, especially coming off of the heels of the previous chapter, that led to me liking this installment so much, but I don't believe that to be the case. I've had years of retrospective for this installment. It is a narrative and gameplay masterclass. Okay? A resolution to a 6-game-long endeavor to vanquish the Slenderman in a spectacular showcase of technical ambition and narrative. I'm speechless even to this day. I can't even conjure the words to describe the level that this game operates on. Firstly, we had some very good. The classic Slenderman model makes its appearance once again in this title, and we do have some undead in this title with the skeletons, which is that is how ambition is done, ladies and gentlemen. Puppeteering the almost completely dissolved remains of those who did not believe in the Slenderman to fight against the one person who seeks to vanquish his presence. Defining that as a stroke of genius is offensive and incorrect. For the English lexicon does not possess descriptive words that are comprehensible enough to describe how intelligent a move such as that is. And what I've just uttered can be applied to every facet of the experience of Slenderman Must Die Chapter 7. The set dressing, the level design, the enemy AI pathing, the level design, the scripted events, and the narrative. All spectacular. And how resolute this chapter was, and its conclusion was so satisfactory. It was such a sweet and triumphant ending, burning the Slenderman's corpse. I get chills thinking about it to this day. I'm speechless, ladies and gentlemen. As probably were you when I played the game. This chapter is simply perfect. This chapter is perfect. Not even mentioning the fact that the Slender Clown makes an appearance. Only Poison Games veterans will understand the importance of the Slender Clown making an arrival. They could have done so many things to make the Slenderman look desperate. They could have gave him an army of scorpions. They could have given him a bazooka. They could have given him nukes. Right? They could have had Slenderman destroys the world. They could have had Slenderman tether the sun and pull it into the earth. But they understood that that was compensating for something that they didn't need to compensate for. And even though they had the perfect excuse, a la the chapter that precedes this one, they show the Slenderman's desperation to defeat the player by recruiting an individual who has been absent from the series for years, the Slender Clown. The understanding that they have of their own universe is simply magnificent. And I understand that understanding the Slender Clown's importance is going to be a serious barrier, because you need to know the ins and outs of the entire Slenderman Must Die universe in order to fully embrace just how impactful the Slender Clown's presence is. But even still, I've never had to get a testimony from freshly born players of the Slenderman Must Die Chapter 7. I don't think is anyone's first chapter in the series. At this point, the prolific nature of the Slenderman Must Die series, it had sunk its hooks into the citizens of every fully developed country on the planet. I truly believe such a thing was the case. So, having not played a Slenderman Must Die title before this one, I believe was an impossibility. I don't have the statistics. Poison Games would, but I really don't know. But Jigsaw, he has me kidnapped. I've got a reverse bear trap on my head. He says, if you don't give me the proper statistics, your head's gonna get ripped in half. I would state what I just said with confidence, and I believe I would live. I believe Jigsaw would be like, that's the right answer, bucko, and he'd let the trap go, and I'd walk away a free man, and I'd write a book about it, and then he'd kidnap me for skipping work or something. So, if it isn't apparent enough, this chapter is simply fantastic, and I mean, oh man. What they could have spread throughout multiple chapters: underground catacombs, a church, a graveyard. Those are three very notable locations, ladies and gentlemen. Those could have been their own chapters alone, and they fused them together without being too ambitious. The balance of all of these things that seem contradictory. They get to have their cake and eat it too, and it's the best cake that has ever been baked. I'm at a loss for words with this chapter. It is so amazing, this chapter. It has all of the underlying fundamentals that made the previous chapters so amazing, while also introducing new aspects to the narrative and the gameplay that launches it into stardom. And truthfully, what this chapter means to me and what it represents in my life, I believe makes it the best chapter in the Slenderman Must Die series. And that's an allusion to the future. We still haven't done Slenderman Must Die Chapter 8, but I simply, I can't beat around the bush with this game. It is the best chapter in the series, in my opinion, and I don't think a video game will be able to come even close to what this game means and what it represents. Video games as a genre don't get discussed in history books or schools very often, for the subject is one that lies in indulgence and art, you know, that doesn't get discussed. But I feel like the importance of this video game might actually get it implemented into the history books that get distributed throughout schools, and it'll be the chapter that all of the children will be engaged with the most. I have no doubt about it in my mind. A sudden comeback. No one saw this coming either. And I almost feel like it was intended to have such a stark contrast from the failure that was the chapter that came immediately before this one. My hat goes off to Poison Games, and if the multiverse theory is true and there is a multiverse where this game doesn't exist, I do believe I will create a multiversal travel mechanic in real life, travel to the multiverses where this chapter does not exist, and introduce my alternate selves to this chapter, because they very clearly must be in a very deep depression, and I feel like this game transcends such bounds and is dragging them down, and I don't feel like anyone should suffer such a fate. So I'm gonna start working towards that. I'll see what I can do, but this game is flawless. It is a 20 out of 20. And I have ditched the scale for all of the other games except for Chapter 1 and this one. Which I think tells you, that's how important the scale is. It's only been applied to the two best games in the entire series. But with the best title out of the way, the most recent title, the one that has the most recency bias, Slenderman Must Die Chapter 8. This one I am very conflicted with. For this title, as fun as it is, it's a very fun title. Its meaning to the Slenderman Must Die universe is still unknown. For a lot of plot contradictions regarding both the narrative and the world building imply that this is an alternate what-if scenario. The Slenderman's temple, in which we reduced him to ash, changed its floor plan. We were not the same character that we played as in the previous chapter. The corpses of the Slender Clown were not strewn about the landscape. So I am compelled to believe that this is a what-if scenario. And its place in the tier list is heavily dependent on if this title truly means something in the grand universe of the Slenderman Must Die series. If, in fact, it is a what-if scenario, then I believe the Slenderman Must Die Chapter 8, From Burn to Return, amazing title, it might be the best title of all of the titles. If indeed it is a what-if scenario, one that is not meant to be taken in conjunction with titles prior, I believe it would land in a solid A tier. The scripting, the level design, there's a lot of depth. The weapon sandbox, the boss fight specifically, simply amazing. I believe it would get in an A tier. But if this title is in fact a canonical successor to Chapter 7, That changes his position quite a bit, for I disagree with a lot of the narrative choices that they decided to go with. As formidable and undefeatable as the Slenderman can be at times, the ending that was provided to us in Chapter 7, I mean, a 7-chapter expansive story that extends into the cosmos, I mean, I feel like the Slenderman's power was properly represented in the 7 chapters. I really do. And the feelings that were felt when you burned his corpse in Chapter 7, it was almost melancholic, for the journey was so taxing and scarring. I still have yet to heal my mental wounds from playing Chapter 7. For the previous chapters were so damaging that, you know, both myself and the character that you play as needs time to recover. And I don't feel like processing the victory of Chapter 7 is something that's going to happen in the foreseeable future. But one day I think we will reflect and look at Chapter 7 and we'll understand that the Slenderman is dead and he will never come back. He's been vanquished and we can rest. And the existence of Chapter 8 kind of negates such a thing from happening. Plus, the idea that the Slenderman would harness the fire and use it against us, I'm unsure of how to feel about that idea. I'm unsure of what to feel. It doesn't make no sense, but I don't know. It doesn't give me the best feeling. So, with those considerations in mind, I do believe I'll put Slenderman Must Die Chapter 8 into B tier, below Chapter 2. Simply for the fact that the importance of this title is still ambiguous, and you know, it's Schrodinger's ranking, dependent on its role in the Slenderman Must Die series determines whether or not it gets placed higher or lower. And if, in fact, this is something of one step forward, 2 steps back, and we're breaching back into industrial waste territory, and this is, in fact, canon, I believe the Slenderman Must Die Chapter 8 will go into D tier. Retconning such a masterfully crafted story that concluded in Chapter 7, I feel like would be a major mistake. More what-ifs are greatly appreciated, but attempting to tie them in with the satisfactory ending that was proposed to us in Chapter 7, I feel like would be a mistake. So, as for the time being, it's going into B tier. And we have now come to the end of the Slenderman Must Die octology. Their placements are finalized. The best chapter in the game is the Slenderman Must Die Chapter 7, The Abandoned Graveyard. And the worst low point of the series is, unfortunately, the Slenderman Must Die Chapter 6, Industrial Waste. If you've agreed with anything I've said with this tier list, please put in the comment section down below. If you disagreed, the comment is even more warranted. But the fact that such a tier list can be made alone is a testament to what this franchise means to not just me, but the millions of individuals who have played these games and have ingrained it into their personality. I don't believe there's anything else to say, ladies and gentlemen. This is the quintessential list. Now, I did have an initial plan to include other things like Slender's Mansion, but Slender's Mansion didn't work. It's the lost episode of MosquitoforkGAMING, so I didn't include that one here. Also, it's not made by Poison Games. And I would have included the game that shall not be named, but I'm still too afraid to play that game, and also, it's not a Slenderman Must Die title. That one's a crossover, and that one's a what-if scenario. So, that one's definitely a what-if scenario. So that one I don't feel, I can't with a good conscience include that one into the tier list. But, this is the final ranking. Enough said. Ladies and gentlemen, I really hope you enjoyed this tier list video. I've had a lot of time to think about these chapters and what they mean. And, goodness gracious, I couldn't be more grateful that such a glowing beam of light exists in my life. Well, I hope you enjoyed, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to see more tier lists like this, I mean, put it down in the comment section down below, and I will gladly oblige. But let me know what you thought of this tier list. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Be sure to let me know. But until then, I'll see you next time.